The morning she found out, Maeve had been counting invoices. That's the thing nobody tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't arrive when you're doing something cinematic. It doesn't wait for you to be standing at a window in the rain, or sitting alone in a quiet room with a glass of wine. It shows up when you're hunched over a folding table in the back office of a catering company, cross-referencing line items on a Thursday, and your phone lights up with a text from your cousin that says, "Have you seen Bryn's Instagram?" Maeve hadn't. She put the invoices down. She picked up her phone, and there it was, her sister's face, glowing and soft in the kind of light that only happens when someone has been kissed very recently, pressed against the cheek of a man Maeve recognized immediately. The jawline, the watch, the way he tilted his head when he smiled, like the world was a slightly amusing inconvenience. Rowan. Her Rowan. Except apparently not anymore. The caption read, "When you least expect it, Maeve set the phone face down on the stack of invoices." She picked up her pen. She went back to work because that's what Maeve did. She went back to work because the numbers didn't lie and people did, and she had learned a long time ago which one to trust. She finished the invoices. She locked up the office. She drove home to the apartment she shared with her sister Bryn, and she sat outside in the parking lot for 11 minutes, engine running, deciding whether she was going to cry or not. She decided not. What she decided instead was to pack a bag, leave her key on the kitchen counter, and go to the only place in the city that would be open at 10:30 on a Thursday, and wouldn't ask her any questions. Callahan's, a bar on the east side that smelled like old wood and decisions people would regret by morning. Maeve had done the books for them 2 years ago, when their accountant quit without notice. The owner, a thick-armed man named Duff, had paid her in cash and told her she could drink free anytime she wanted. She had never taken him up on it. She took him up on it now. She sat at the far end of the bar, away from the Thursday night regulars, and she let Duff pour her something amber without asking what it was. He looked at her face and had the good sense not to say anything. Maeve drank. She looked at the bottles lined up against the mirror behind the bar. She thought about calling her mother, then remembered her mother was the one who'd told Bryn that Rowan was too good for someone like Maeve. "Honey, you know how she is, always so sharp, always with the numbers." No warmth. She found out about that one at Christmas, from an aunt who thought she already knew. She ordered a second drink. The bar was not busy. A group of men in suits occupied 3 booths near the window, not the after-work kind of suits, not the loosened tie, let's complain about our boss kind. These were sharper, quicker. They sat with their backs to walls and their eyes toward doors, the way men sit when they are always tracking exits. Maeve noticed, and then she didn't care, because she was on her second drink and the amber thing tasted like smoke, and she was thinking about Bryn's face in that photograph, soft and lit up, and how she had never once in her life seen Bryn look like that when she was looking at Maeve. She was on her third drink when the man sat down next to her. She didn't look up. "Bar's mostly empty," she said. "Lot of other seats." "I know." He didn't move. She looked up then. He was not what she expected. Not that she'd been expecting anyone. He was older, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that had been through something more than once. There was a scar along his jaw, thin and old, the kind that had long since stopped being interesting to the person wearing it. He was dressed like the men in the booths, but he wasn't sitting with them. He was sitting here at the end of the bar next to her with a glass of water, just water. "You're Duff's bookkeeper," he said. "Was, 2 years ago. He still talks about you." He said it like a fact he had retrieved from a file. "Says you found a discrepancy nobody else had caught in 3 years. It wasn't hard. Someone was skimming from the liquor deliveries and logging it as breakage. Classic." She looked back at her drink. "You a friend of Duff's?" A pause. "In a manner of speaking. Great." She picked up her glass. "Well, feel free to be a friend of Duff's somewhere else. I'm not really in the mood for company." He didn't leave. She should have been annoyed. She was, a little. But there was something about the way he sat. Not pressing, not angling toward her, just present. That was less intrusive than most people managed to be. He picked up his water. He looked at the bar in front of him. He let her be in her mood without trying to fix it, which was more than most men she'd met could say. "Bad night?" he asked eventually. "Found out my sister has been sleeping with my boyfriend, so—" "Average Thursday." Another pause. "Your boyfriend tell you?" "Instagram. My cousin sent me a screenshot. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not a laugh. Efficient." "Yeah." She swirled what was left in her glass. "I just keep thinking, she's not even good for him. Like, Bryn's beautiful, she's always been the beautiful one, I know that, whatever. But she can't sit still for 10 minutes. She doesn't remember people's birthdays. She borrowed $40 from me in March, and I'm pretty sure she forgot about it by April." She stopped. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because I'm not anyone," he said. "Easy to talk to someone who's not anyone." That was a strange thing to say, and it was exactly right. And Maeve looked at him again. "What's your name, ass?" "Calloway." "Just the last name. No first," she noticed. "Maeve," she said. He nodded, like he might have already known that too. She didn't think about what that meant until much later. She wasn't drunk. That was the thing. She'd had 3 drinks over 2 hours, which for Maeve was barely a shift in register. Her tolerance was not something she was proud of. It was a side effect of years of doing books for establishments that paid her partly in product. She was tired and she was sad and she was somewhere past crying, which is a specific kind of exhausted that has no good word for it. She was on her way to the bathroom when she heard it. 2 men. The hallway near the back exit. Voices, low and clipped, the kind of conversation that wasn't meant to be overheard. "Calloway doesn't know yet. He'll know soon enough. You think Vidal's going to wait? He had an agreement. The agreement's dead, the money's moved, there's nothing left to," and then one of them saw her. Everything happened very fast after that, in the way that fast things always seem to happen in slow motion when they're happening to you. The man nearest her grabbed her arm. She said something. She wasn't sure what. Something automatic, something polite, the way she always defaulted to polite when frightened, which was its own kind of embarrassing. The other man was saying something about a phone. Whether she'd heard. What she'd heard. She hadn't heard much. She'd heard enough. And then Calloway was there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He said 3 words, just 3, and she didn't catch all of them, but the effect was immediate. The man holding her arm let go. Both of them went still in the way that people go still when they are recalibrating how much trouble they are in. Calloway looked at them for a long moment with an expression that was not angry, which somehow made it worse. "No!" Her arm would bruise, but she wasn't hurt. "Who are those? Come with me. I don't know you." "You know my name." He said it simply. "And you were in the wrong hallway at the wrong time, which means your night just got more complicated than a boyfriend and a sister. So, come with me, or don't. But if you don't, I can't promise those 2 have the patience for loose ends." Maeve looked at the 2 men. She looked at Calloway. She did the math. She went with him. His car was black and clean and very quiet. One of his men drove. Calloway sat in the back with Maeve and he didn't speak for the first 4 minutes, which she counted. "What did you hear?" he asked. "A name. Vidal. Something about money and an agreement." "That's enough." He said it like he was calculating something. "Do you know what I do, Maeve? I'm getting a fairly clear picture. Then you understand why this is a problem. I understand why you think it's a problem." She kept her voice even. This was a thing she had trained herself to do, to keep her voice even when her brain was doing something else entirely, when it was running through scenarios and exit possibilities and what-ifs at a pace that would alarm most people. "I'm an accountant. I do books for small businesses. I have no interest in whatever you have going on, and no one to tell even if I did." He was quiet for a moment. "What kind of books?" "Payroll. Accounts payable and receivable. Cash flow. Occasionally I find money that's been moved somewhere it shouldn't be." A pause. "How often do you find it?" "Every time, eventually." She looked at him. "Why?" He didn't answer. The car pulled through a gate and onto a private drive, and Maeve looked out the window at a house that was large and very dark and set well back from the road, and she thought, "I should be more frightened than I am." But she'd used up most of her fear on Bryn's Instagram post, and there was something about Calloway that was less like danger and more like weather, unavoidable, not malicious, just a thing that was happening. The house was not what she expected either. It was expensive but not showy. No gold fixtures, no marble waterfalls, books, an actual fireplace. A desk that looked like it had been used, genuinely used, with stacks of folders and a lamp that cast a yellow working light. A man met them at the door, 50s, carrying a folder. He looked at Maeve with the specific expression of someone trying not to show that something was unexpected. "Sir, there's been a development." "I know." Calloway took the folder without opening it. "Get her something to eat." "I'm not hungry," Maeve said. "Get her something anyway." The man led her to a kitchen. Someone produced a plate of things, bread, cheese, something with herbs. Maeve sat at the kitchen table and ate because she hadn't eaten since noon, and her body was being more practical than her emotions, which she respected. She was on her second piece of bread when the man with the folder came back. "Mr. Calloway would like to speak with you." He was at the desk. He'd taken off his jacket. There was a glass of whiskey, actual whiskey, not water, at his elbow, barely touched. He looked up when she came in and pointed at the chair across from him with the folder. She sat. "I have a problem," he said. "You mentioned, I have a business that has been bleeding money for 8 months. My last financial manager quit. The one before him was stealing." He set the folder open on the desk. "I've had 2 firms look at these books. Neither of them could tell me where it was coming from." Maeve looked at the papers. She reached across without asking and turned the top page toward her. She looked at it for 30 seconds. "Your inventory write-offs are wrong," she said. He was quiet. "Here." She pointed. "You're writing off 18% as shrinkage every quarter. But your acquisition records show you're operating at a 94% retention rate. The gap is 6 points, but it's being distributed across 7 different cost centers, so it looks like normal variance. It's not. Someone's been splitting withdrawals to stay under the threshold that triggers review." She looked up. "How long has your current logistics manager been with you?" Something shifted in his face. Not quite surprise. More like the expression of someone who has been looking for a thing in a dark room and suddenly found a light switch. 3 years, he said. "When did the bleeding start?" A pause. 8 months ago. He took over expanded operations 8 months ago. Maeve set the paper down. "I'd want to see the last 2 years of records before I said anything definitive. That can be arranged." She looked at him. "I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm saying if you showed me the records, I could probably tell you more." "Understood." He studied her with that measuring expression, the one she'd noticed at the bar, like she was a column of numbers he was adding up. "You came in with nothing tonight," he said. "No car. 1 bag. You told me yourself, no one to call." She didn't answer. "I'm not saying that as a threat." He picked up the whiskey. "I'm saying it as context. You don't have anywhere to be. I have a job. You do books for a catering company and 4 other clients. Freelance." He said it without judgment, which means flexible. She looked at him for a long moment. "You want to hire me? I want to offer you a room, a meal that isn't bar food, and a rate that is considerably above what a catering company pays." He leaned back in his chair. "In exchange for finding whatever has been moved, and wherever it went. When you're done, you leave, with whatever you've been paid, and with no further involvement in anything that happens after." It was a clean offer. Maeve had heard enough bad offers in her life to recognize a clean one. She was still suspicious. She was always suspicious. It was her most reliable trait. But she ran the logic, and the logic was, she had nowhere to sleep tonight. She had $43 in checking, she had a sister who had stolen her boyfriend, and a mother who thought she was too sharp to be lovable. And across from her was a man who had looked at her brain working and not been threatened by it. "I want it in writing," she said. His mouth moved. "I'll have my lawyer draw something up tonight. And I want access to everything. Not the sanitized version. If someone's hiding money in your books, I need to see the whole picture." "Done." She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "One more thing. Name it, the 2 men in the hallway at Callahan's. I'm not a loose end. I'm an employee. That's the frame we're using. He looked at her steadily, agreed. She picked up the folder. She took it to the chair and sat down with her legs crossed and her reading posture on, which meant shoulders squared and eyes moving fast. He went back to whatever he'd been doing. The lamp between them was warm and the house was quiet. She found the second discrepancy in 11 minutes. She stayed 3 weeks. That wasn't the plan. The plan had been a week, maybe 10 days, enough to trace the money, document the trails, and collect her check. Clean and simple. It wasn't clean. It was never clean. Money that's been moved doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in spirals and doubles back and hides in the spaces between legitimate transactions, and the person who had done this one was patient and not stupid. Just not as good as Maeve. Nobody was. She worked from a room they gave her on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked out onto a garden that no one seemed to use, and a table large enough to spread papers across, and a standing lamp she moved 3 times before she found the right angle. She ate breakfast at 7, lunch at her desk, dinner in the kitchen when she remembered. Callaway staff fed her without being asked. Someone always seemed to be leaving something near her workspace. Soup, coffee, bread with that herb thing, which she eventually identified as compound butter and developed a specific attachment to. She crossed paths with Callaway every day, usually in the hallways, or briefly in the common rooms, in the way you crossed paths with someone in a house that's too large for either of you. He didn't hover. She noticed this specifically because in her experience, powerful men who hired her always hovered, always wanted updates every 20 minutes, always second-guessed the findings, always had a theory they wanted confirmed rather than a truth they wanted found. He checked in once a day, in the evenings. Standing in the doorway of the room where she worked, he would say, "How's it going?" She would say, "Getting there." And he would look at whatever was spread across her table with the expression of someone who trusted a process, even when they couldn't see all of it, and then he would leave. It unsettled her the way it unsettled her when something added up correctly on the first try. Like a small shock of something unexpected. She'd been there 8 days when she found his personal accounts, not by snooping. They'd been included in the files she was given, the ones that touched the bleeding cost centers. She wasn't looking for anything personal, but the picture was there if you looked at it right. The transfers to a medical facility in Maryland, monthly, consistent, significant. The legal fees that tracked against a custody matter she'd found reference to in an invoice from 18 months ago. The way the house had a child's bedroom that no one mentioned, and that she had walked past 3 times before she realized it had toys in it, a specific arrangement of toys. The way a room looks when it is waiting for someone to come back to it. She didn't ask. She told herself it wasn't her business. It wasn't. But she thought about it on the 9th day when Callaway came to the doorway at his usual time and said, "How's it going?" And she said, "Getting there." And he looked at the papers and something in his face was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that had nothing to do with the accounts she was working through. "You should sleep," she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her. She'd surprised him. "I sleep fine." "You don't," she said it matter-of-factly, the way she said things about numbers. "You have the look of someone who hasn't slept properly in months. The kind that compounds." He was quiet for a moment. "You're very observant for an accountant." Accountants are the most observant people in any room. We just don't usually say anything. She picked up her pen. "I found 3 of the cost center bridges today. I need 2 more days." He nodded. He looked at the room. Her things spread across his table, her coffee mug. Second one. She'd lost the first one, and they had produced another without comment, her shoes off because she always worked in socks when she was in deep, and something in his expression was different from the measuring look. Less calculation. More the expression of someone noting a thing. He said, "There's a garden." She looked up. "I noticed you looking at it, in the mornings." He wasn't quite meeting her eyes. "If you want to use it. The garden." "I wasn't. I was just looking." "I know." He pushed off the door frame. "Good night, Maeve." She looked at the garden the next morning she went into it. The herbs were real. Rosemary, time, something woody she couldn't name. It was very quiet, and the light was early morning grey, and she stood out there for 10 minutes in her coat and her work socks, and she thought, "This is a strange detour I am taking in my life." But the strangest part was that it didn't feel like a detour. She found the last bridge on day 11. The logistics manager, his name was Renner, and he had a second phone and a shell entity in Delaware, and the patience of a man who thought he was being very clever, had moved a total of $462,000 over 8 months. He'd been good. He'd been careful. He had not been careful enough. Maeve laid out the full picture on 12 pages of her neat, factual handwriting, with supporting documentation cross-referenced by tab, and she put it on Calloway's desk. He read it in silence, all 12 pages. She sat across from him and waited, which she was good at. "This is thorough," he said when he was done. "It's complete. You'll have everything you need." He looked at the last page for a long moment. "What will you do now?" She'd been thinking about this. The catering company had called twice. She had a new client inquiry in her email. She had no sister to go back to, but she had a sublet option on an apartment in the East Side she'd been sitting on for 4 months because the timing had never worked. "Go back," she said. "Get an apartment. Work." He set the pages down. He looked at her, not the measuring look, not the inventory look, the other one, the one she'd started to recognize. "The house has needs," he said. She waited. "Not financial." "Well, financial, but also operational. My current management of the accounts is handled by a firm that sends a junior associate once a month and charges me for a senior partner." He said it flatly, with the particular dryness she'd come to realize was his version of contempt. "They missed what you found in 8 days. In 11 days, you found the structure in 3. The documentation took 8. She looked at him. "You want to hire me again?" "I want to hire you on retainer." He paused. "You'd have your own clients, your own schedule, the room here would be yours. When you need it, you'd be contracted independently with a scope that you define." It was again a clean offer. She was suspicious again. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive. She'd learned to tell the difference. "Considering, because you work without needing to be right," he said. "Every person I've hired in the last 3 years has needed to be right. They came in with a theory, and they found whatever supported it and called it finished." He looked at the 12 pages. "You didn't do that. You followed what was there." She looked at her hands. She thought about the catering company. She thought about the sublet. She thought about Bryn's photograph and her mother's voice and the way she had been sitting in that parking lot 11 minutes in the dark. "I have 3 conditions," she said. He waited. "First, my contracts are always with me, not the organization. If this arrangement ends, it ends cleanly and nothing I've accessed leaves with me or is used as leverage. Ever." She held his gaze. "Second, the scope is mine to set. You tell me what you need to know. I decide how to find it and what to give you." He nodded. "The compound butter at breakfast. That's non-negotiable." His face did the thing that was almost a smile, the almost smile she'd been cataloguing for 11 days without entirely meaning to. "Done," he said. The weeks that followed were not easy, exactly. They were not what Maeve would have described as simple or uncomplicated or even, by normal metrics, good. Calloway's world was not a simple place. There were men who came to the house and spoke in low voices and left without eye contact, and there were evenings where the atmosphere changed in a way Maeve couldn't account for, and there were nights where she lay in the second-floor room listening to the house be very quiet and thinking about exits, about the way she was building a life in a place that she had ended up in entirely by accident. Except the daughter was named Violet. Maeve found out not because anyone told her, but because a drawing appeared on the kitchen refrigerator one morning. A child's drawing, crayon, a figure with dark hair and another figure with red-brown hair, labeled in a child's hand, Daddy and the numbers lady. She stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at it. Calloway came in, registered the drawing, registered Maeve looking at it, and for once he was the one who looked uncertain. "She was here last weekend," he said. "She must have. I didn't know she'd put that up." "It's a good likeness," Maeve said. "She got my hair right." She looked at the drawing. Something settled in the space between them, not resolved, not finished, just laid down carefully, the way you'd lay down something fragile. The arrangement became known to Calloway's network. Not all of it, but enough. She sat in on meetings when the numbers mattered. She cross-referenced what she was told against what she could verify. And she told him when they diverged. And she was not wrong about the things she said were wrong. Vidal, the name from the hallway, the name she'd heard through the wrong door on a Thursday that had already been catastrophic, turned out to be a man who believed that the arrangement 3 Distribution Calloway had with for renegotiation partners, on his terms, because Calloway was distracted. Because thus the custody matter was ongoing. Because Calloway's operation looked, from the outside, like it was bleeding. It was not bleeding anymore. She told him this the evening the news came that Vidal had tested it, had made a move against one of the distribution routes, small enough to be a probe, large enough to be deliberate. She walked into the study. She put a single page on his desk. "The accounts your competitor believes are weakest," she said. "They're not. I moved the exposure to these 3 cost centers and distributed it across the quarter so the variance pattern reads as operational fluctuation. From the outside, it looks like you've been managing a slow recovery since April." She pointed. "You haven't. You've been recapitalizing here and here and here. Anyone doing due diligence from outside would see the recovery and assume you're not ready. You are ready." Calloway looked at the page. He looked at her. "You did this without being asked. You didn't ask because you didn't know it was possible." She picked up her own copy. "I'll walk you through the full structure if you want to understand it, or you can just know the outcome. Walk me through it." She did. It took 40 minutes. He asked good questions. The kind of questions that showed he was following, not the kind that showed he needed to look like he was following. When she was done, he sat back and looked at the ceiling, and she thought he might be about to say something transactional. He said, "Violet asked about you." Maeve stopped. "She's coming next weekend." He said it to the ceiling. She wanted to know if the numbers lady would still be here. Maeve looked at her copy of the page, the neat columns, the clean, true figures. "Will she?" he asked. He still wasn't looking at her. This, she had realized, was how Calloway asked for things he wasn't sure he was allowed to want. He looked at neutral objects and said the words toward the air between them. "I'll be here," she said. He looked at her then. The lamp on his desk was yellow and warm, and the house was quiet in its usual way, the kind of quiet that had begun to feel less like absence and more like something she recognized. Her files were in the second-floor room. Her shoes were off. The 3rd mug, they'd lost 2 now, she was apparently a hazard to ceramic, was on the corner of his desk, where it had ended up after she'd set it down during a particularly interesting argument about cash flow projections. It wasn't the life she'd been building. It wasn't any life she'd planned. But Maeve had always been better at the truth of what was there than the theory of what was supposed to be. She looked at the figures on the page. Clean, true, exactly right. And she thought, some numbers are just waiting for the right person to read them. She thought maybe she was one of them.